Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 4th regular meeting of Council. I would first like to recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. Welcome back. The question period sign-up sheet is on the partition near the gallery. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. At the start of question period, I will call forth those who've signed up to the podium to address Council, keeping in mind that it is items that are already on the agenda that you can raise questions about. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. We have none, Ms. Gurry.
There's no late items, Your Worship.
And a motion for approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmens. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carried. A motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Councillor Armstrong, seconded Councillor Bonner. Yes, I was just going to say everybody's hand is up. Any discussion? All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. The next item is the Mayor's report. Just a couple of things I want to mention. I want to thank Council for kindly a few weeks ago agreeing to pay for my cost to attend the Mid-Island Business Improvement launch event in Vancouver, and I can happily report that was well attended by a significant number of investors and business people. And to finish it off, I can tell you happily that because I'm a senior and someone offered me a ride, there were no expenses to the city for my attendance in Vancouver. Also, I want to report that your council members had an opportunity and did meet with the Airport Commission recently, and likewise with the school board, all of which is important in furthering those relationships that we had promised to renew and support within our community. So that is good news. But the main item on the agenda tonight is, happily, given Council's discussions previously in previous motions, the Code of Conduct that was adopted at the 28th Committee of the Whole meeting and agreed to be adopted to sign the accompanying declaration at the next meeting of Council. I don't think we require a formal motion to adopt it here, do we, Ms. Gurry? No. So I am very pleased as Mayor, and we're going to hand it around tonight to sign a Council Code of Conduct reflective of our commitment as a Council to the kind of decorous behavior that one would expect of publicly elected officials. And I'm very proud to sign it this day, and I look forward to seeing it passed around tonight so that we can all have our opportunity to sign. I'll go to my left. Ms. Gurry's pen. It's a nice one. Something quite appropriate about the senior member of Council in terms of experience here being the last to sign.
I was going to hesitate, but there's no hesitation needed.
This reflects, I think, a commitment that was made by all of us when we ran for office, and it was something that the City of Nanaimo and its citizens looked forward to. It's been accomplished really quite easily, all things considered. I'm going to date it, Ms. Gurry, if that's permissible. And it is the 4th. And at some point tonight, we're all going to gather around and have our picture taken with this. A good step forward. I'm going to hand it down and let Councillor Turley deliver it and return Ms. Gurry's lovely pen.
No stealing of pens. Thank you.
We're on to presentations. 2018 Community Development Year in Review. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. For those new council members, just so you know, this is a presentation that we come forward early each year to kind of give you an opportunity to review what the department's been up to in the last year, but to look specifically at development that's been going on throughout our community. Your Worship, generally we focus on stats, but at the start I talk about some of the other accomplishments of the department. I'm not going to go into great detail in these tonight because I think we covered these in our orientation sessions and in the budget deliberations, but just to touch on, there's a majority of the department that works on development approvals, but there are other significant works that have been done in the department over 2018, and they're worth noting again. The affordable housing strategy, the hospital area plan were all adopted, both adopted in 2018. The continuation of our temporary outdoor public art program, and council just approved that to continue on for 2019. The Living History Speaker Series, other public art and recognition projects, including the Departure Bay House Posts and the Raven at the water treatment plant. Our work in culture, including around the poetry in transit and a heritage summit that was held in 2018. Other items the department worked on, of course, in land acquisition at 5260 Tanya Drive to add to the Lindley Valley Park. Continued work at the C-SPAN, including working on finalizing the details of the land purchase and disposition on those sites. The development of 5290 Rutherford Road and allowing for that remnant piece of land after the road was constructed to be developed and sold. And the final item we recognize is the downtown revitalization tax exemption. Again, Your Worship, a good part of what we come this presentation is to talk about what we've seen occur in terms from the development perspective in the NIMO in 2018. And I'd like to start the presentation with a couple of stats just to give some context. And vacancy rate is one of those stats that we continue to talk about, and you may have questions as we go through the presentation this evening. But you can see here in 2018, the vacancy rate jumped from what was 1.6% in 2017 to 2.5%. Taking a little bit closer look at that 2.5% number, this is a breakdown on the unit type of purpose-built rental throughout the community and the vacancy rate in each part. There's a couple of quick things to point out here. If you look at the 1 and 2 bedrooms, first of all, those two types of units comprise the majority of our purpose-built rental. So about the 3,800 units we have in the community, about 35 are 1 and 2 bedrooms. And you can see the vacancy rates in those 1 and 2 bedrooms still remain relatively low at 2.3%, 2%. We're going to talk more about this. We have a session on housing that's coming up next week for you in council. And I think a lot of the questions are, well, why is the vacancy rate so low at a time when we've been building significant amount of purpose-built rental? And what we'll show you is that really in the last 30 years, there has been no real purpose-built rental built in the community until literally the last handful of years. And in fact, what's happened, and what often doesn't get told as part of that story, is we actually saw a decline in the total number of purpose-built buildings as buildings were taken down or redeveloped, sites were redeveloped. So we actually lost units over the last 30 years. It wasn't that we maintained status quo, and we're just slowly building that number back up today. So you can see there again, in total, 2.5% in the community, break down the average rents by unit type. In terms of housing costs, is another one of these questions that we often get is what's the average price of housing? And this information comes right from the Vancouver Island Real Estate Board. From 2017 to 2018, we've seen a continuation in the average single-family residential house price, 2018 ending at just over $550,000. To the meat of the presentation, Your Worship, we report on a few key stats each year. One of those is number of new single-family dwellings. So this is the number of single-family dwellings that we've issued building permits for. So you can see there, that's the 2017 number of 309. If you look at the last 10 years, we average about 275 new single-family homes in the community each year. In 2018, we saw the number drop to 264, so bringing us back in line with approximately our average over the last 10 years, but certainly a healthy number, continues to be a healthy number of new single-family housing starts. The other question we often get is, well, how many of those new houses contain suites? So we've been monitoring this since 2004 when suites were legalized in the community. You can see in 2017 it was about 56%. If you look at the average, we hovered just over that 50% mark, hitting a high back early 2010, 2011 of over 60%. This year we saw it go back up close to that high, so 60% of all new homes in the community contain suites. So that's 158 of the new homes built. 158 of the 264 homes contain suites. At this point, Worship, it's probably worth noting, and I mentioned it's since 2004 that the community has legalized, and the council made the bold decision, in my opinion, at that time to legalize suites in every home across the community. That's resulted in a sizable number. So with the number of suites that were added this year, it puts us at just over 3,000 secondary suites that have been added to the community since 2004. So, Your Worship, I think that's worth noting as 3,000 non-subsidized, safe rental units that have been added. And if you think about that in terms of buildings, if you built apartment buildings that had 50 units each, you'd have to build 60 apartment buildings just to get close to that number. So even though we've added suites and we've added a considerable number of suites in the community, the vacancy rate in the purpose-built rental has still remained relatively low. Looking at where we are overall in the community, so this looks at the single family, again, is reported here, but in terms of multifamily and then the total amount of single family dwellings. So the total there in 2017 was 858. That average in the community around 800 units that we create each year. You can see in 2018 that number jumped to about 950 units in all type. And if you look at the bottom there, the green line being multifamily, you can see that we issued a significantly higher number of multifamily dwellings. But when you look at the single family and the suites combined, they're relatively equal. So in terms of the actual housing form, we're seeing more multifamily in 2018, but in terms of unit composition, it's relatively equal between single family and multifamily. The other stat we like to report on each year is the construction value. So this is the value of all new construction in the community, all single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial, blended together. You can see here is the 2017 number, which was our fourth year in a row over $200 million. The average is about $180 million, and we saw that increase in 2018. So the 2018 number is about $216 million at the end of the year. And as you can see, it's largely comprised of residential development across the community. And that's been a consistent theme for the last decade or more here in the city. The next series of slides, if I get this going, shows housing starts across the community. We like to include this each year just to give a sense when we talk about housing numbers where they're actually being built in the community. So each dot represents, red dot is a single family home and the blue is a multifamily. And what we show here is that it continues to be infill across our community. It's not one area of the community over the other. It's really development from the north to the south. And if you look at the past years in the city, you would see a very consistent theme. You see here some areas where there's a concentration, which are new subdivisions that have come online, but a number of infill, and you can even see areas in the downtown and Protection Island where we've had new housing starts. And if you get, again, a side-by-side comparison of 2017 to 2018, consistent in terms of development throughout the community. One stat we've committed to including in our presentation each year is where we are with our processing times and our targets. These are not all of our processes, and we picked some key processes here to talk to you about. And our targets for single family, so 3 is number of weeks. So 3 weeks is what our target is for issuing a single family permit. In 2018, we're just under 5.5 weeks for the average single family permit. Rezoning's 32 weeks. In 2018, about 38 weeks we were meeting. Our development permits are where we're having the greatest amount of challenge, and I'm going to talk to you about why that is in a minute. Our target there is 12 weeks, with us being around 24 weeks in 2018. Development variance permits were slightly over our average, over our target at 6. Subdivision PLAs, this is our initial review for subdivision applications. Again, reflective of the volume of work we have, but in our target's 8 weeks, and we're coming in right now about in 2018 at about 15 weeks. So a little bit to talk about those processing times and why we're off of our targets. I think it's important to talk about the development that's going on in the community. And one of the things we do every year is we pick the top 5 projects by construction value to give a sense and give you a flavor of what we're seeing in the community and where. The 5th project is at 6540 Metro Drive. It's noted here, this is a 66-unit development. If people can picture the site, this is the property that's immediately across from Home Depot. Your Worship, it's from staff's perspective, it represents a significant change in the approach of the development of these lands, of what has been historically commercial, thought of as a commercial center. We're now seeing infill residential in and around these sites, and this being sort of the first one out of the gate in the north end. We have another permit that was issued very close by for a purpose-built rental building, 51 units. This is the property, the last property right before you leave the city, if people can think of the vacant site right behind the Michaels. This is the first building. There are 2 more buildings that are in permit stream and about to be issued on that site. So again, a significant investment in the community, but also residential in a form and location where we see it being desired. Important investment here in the downtown, 91 Chapel Street. So this is if people are familiar with the history of downtown, this is the former theater site, the movie theater. So the site's being redeveloped for 61 units at $8.6 million construction value. Second year in a row where we've seen significant investment in the downtown. 5885 Uplands Drive. As noted, a 59-unit development on Uplands. Again, a significant purpose-built building that's being added to our residential, our rental housing stock. And the last one we've noted here under the 5260 Dublin, this is another apartment building for 60 units. This is part of an overall mixed-use development that's occurring along between Metro and the Old Island Highway, sort of opposite of, people think of opposite of Rutherford Mall. And Your Worship, normally I would stop there with the top 5 because I want to give you a sense, but given the amount and the volume of development that we saw in 2018, I think it's worth noting there are other projects that are probably worth mentioning, and here are just a sample of some of the other building permits that have been approved in 2018. So at 858 Georgia, this is a 27-unit project on the old co-op site. So this is part of a redevelopment of that site. So the Quality Foods has moved down there. Mixed-use redevelopment of that land, so a significant investment in Harewood. And again, 601 Bruce, this is opposite of the old Harewood Mall in terms of another investment in that community. And we also have, although we focused a lot on residential here so far, there have been other projects, including industrial projects on Boxwood, this one at 2073 Boxwood Road. There's been commercial investments in the form of the Lazy Boy, which is under construction at 4950 Uplands. There's a mixed-use office building on Portsmouth Road, and the first phase of what is the old Highways Works Yard on 3rd Street, which has these 2 fourplexes have now been constructed. So if you've been by the site recently, they're very near completion, but there's many more phases on that site to go. And Your Worship, I would normally stop and not talk about 2019, but I think it's important to note that there was many projects that we were working on right up to the end of 2019 that in fact got issued up to the end of 2018 that ended up being issued in 2019, in January of 2019. These are but 4 examples, but I think there's some significant ones here. There's 2020 Estevan, which is a project that's been on the old United Church site, which is funded through BC Housing. That's underway for 74 units, and it's mixed use in terms of the church will be incorporated into that development. 440 Selby Street, which is for a 45-unit hotel. 20 Prideaux Street, another seniors project with support of BC Housing, and that's for 57 units. And a project on Boxwood Road for some additional industrial. So Your Worship, as I mentioned earlier, about 200 million, we've seen 200 million in the last 4 years, 216 in 2018. These projects and others in January represented a month of about $46 million worth of construction value in 1 month. So in addition to those permits that have been issued, we have a number of permits which are approved and ready for issuance, which means staff's work on them is complete and it requires the applicant to come in and pick up those permits. So I know that there's going to be additional permits that are going to be going out the door in the next few weeks, including the following. The 100 Gordon, of course, which is the 9-story hotel immediately behind this building for 172 hotel suites. 1515 Dufferin, this is for a purpose-built medical office building near the hospital. 15 Front Street, which is another small boutique hotel with 89 units, and another phase at 3rd Street. So this is a 22-unit mixed-use development, again, adjacent to those previous fourplexes that I showed that were under permit and under construction. So, Your Worship, in addition to that $46 million that we issued in January, these permits alone probably represent another $45 million worth of construction. So I think conservatively, by the end of February and certainly in the first quarter, we're going to be looking at $100 million worth of construction value in the community. So a significant amount of development and development approvals that have gone through the department in just literally the last few weeks. There are other permits, significant permits, which are in stream and staff continue to work on, including further investment in our industrial park on Boxwood, Halliburton in the south end, 20 Barsby for a residential project. This is at the end of Prudhoe down near the Millstone River. And of course, a significant project at 10 Buttertubs, which is another project that's been supported by BC Housing for 159 units of affordable seniors housing. And many of these permits are getting very close to issuance, Your Worship. Again, further permits that are in stream and people will likely see over the course of the next few months break ground. 1400 Windgrove, which is a redevelopment of the Amricos property in Departure Bay, and other various residential and commercial projects throughout the community. And Your Worship, I could go on, but these are other projects that staff are currently reviewing, including, I would note just quickly here, residential units on Uplands, further investments at the property on 3rd Street where there's been all the work on the street, and we talked about the 2 earlier phases. This phase 3 is purpose-built student housing, which is part of their overall application. And of course, staff are currently reviewing a significant project in our downtown, which is 77 Chapel Street. And that project being a 24-story mixed-use building with 109 units that would be adding additional residents and services into our downtown. Moving from development permits moving from building permits into development permits, some permits that have approval and we would expect to move forward with their building permit in short order include other investments in supportive housing, in industrial, and in case of 65 Pride is actually a below market rental project that's being supported through a program through BC Housing. Your Worship, the other area we like to report on each year is the subdivision activity in the community. So you can see here in 2018 there were 319 new single-family lots created. So you would expect that to translate into new permits in 2019. In total, there's 560 lots that are in stream. So we still have capacity in the community to add additional lots, and those are the ones that are currently making their way through our approval system. As I've talked about previously with Council, the Land Titles Act actually gives us the authority to obtain park dedication through subdivision. So on the majority of subdivisions, we have the ability to obtain 5%, and we like to report on that every year. And in 2018, that resulted in just over 2 hectares of park being added to the community. And on those lands where we elected not to obtain park, it resulted in a contribution of about $450,000. And those monies are now available for the city to acquire parkland in other locations. Your Worship, with all new development in the city, the developers are responsible for what we typically refer to as frontage works and services. So they pay for new infrastructure in our community. So what I'm reporting on here are those infrastructure additions which have been added through development. This is not a summary of all of the capital projects in the city. It's very, very specific to just those that have been done through development. So in addition to this, there are other capital projects that the city undertakes. But part of the reason we like to report on this is, and we've talked to council a lot about asset management, is that of course the development pays for these, but we inherit them, and the moment they're complete, it becomes our responsibility for long-term maintenance of these assets. And you can also see that these numbers are very reflective of the volume of work that's been going through the department in 2018. So if you look at any one of those columns, you can see a significant jump in the amount of new infrastructure that's been added, everything from streetlights to fire hydrants to new roads in the community. And again, that's reflective of the volume of permits and the volume of work that staff have been doing. Development approval, so these are the developments for rezoning and development permits, and part of the reason we like to look at this is it gives us a sense of what's coming down the pike in terms of building permits for the following years. So 2018, although you can see the numbers for rezoning were relatively high, 37, I would note that 13 of those are related directly to cannabis retail stores. So if you took those out, you'd probably be at a number that was more consistent with what we've seen in past years. Our development permit numbers have dropped in 2018, but the type of application has actually resulted in more multifamily units in general. So you can see, although the number of permits has dropped in 2018, the overall units proposed as part of those applications still remains high. So we have about 1,400 units there that are working their way through the system. That's in addition to the single-family lots that I mentioned earlier. And again, as noted here, well above the 5-year average. Other numbers that council may be interested in, so separate from council approvals, we have our Board of Variance. In 2018, there were 10 applications to the board. 8 of those were approved, 1 was denied, and I believe for those who can do quick math, you'll realize there's 1 missing, and I believe there was one that was withdrawn in 2018. Development variance permits, and those are the applications that do come forward to council. There was 41 in 2018, with 32 of those being approved. The remainder of those could be a combination of they were denied, but more likely those applications are there's still some of those which are in stream and yet to come to council. And Your Worship, that's the end of my presentation, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Very impressive. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I would have been disappointed.
Yeah, for sure. Mr. Lindsay, do we ever have comparisons of our stats with other communities roughly the same size?
So, Your Worship, we do have those. I don't normally include them in my presentation, but if that's something council's interested, we can easily get those and circulate that to council.
Thank you. And one other question, our processing times, this seems to come up in conversation a lot, especially in the community. How do we plan on getting those down, and what can we do to help?
Your Worship, I don't think there's one simple answer to that. I think part of what we're seeing here is a significant volume of work that's come through to the department, and I honestly think we've kind of worked our way through. We had a massive projects that came in at one time, essentially. We've worked our way through that. We had another significant blip, if you want, let me call it that came in December that was related to a provincial building code change. So there was a number of applications that came in to get in and be in stream for that building code. I think we'll work through that, and I think part of as we get through those 2 peaks, and we'll get back to more normal processing. The reality is we do have vacancies in our departments, and specifically the building department has been very difficult to maintain a full staff complement. This is not unique to Nanaimo. This is something that's occurring throughout. I talked to all of our other communities who are dealing with the exact same issue. So retaining or obtaining and retaining really experienced staff is a challenge. We've had a significant number of retirements in all of our sections and turnover. So at the same time that we've had that, we've had this combination of this blip. We realize that going forward status quo, we need to look differently at what we're doing. So we've been working closely with some representatives in the development community about what we can do to make sure that the applications that come in are complete and that we can review them in a more timely manner. And also looking at our processing, is there anything we can do around approvals? And other communities have done some things in terms of expediting projects that have what they call a certified coordinator or a coordinated professional, which looks at all of the other professions that are involved in building permits. So we are exploring that, and I expect to come back to council with some options on that in the very near future.
And if I may, Your Honor, I'd like to do a big shout out to all the developers who are spending their time and energy and money in our community and helping us out, including BC Housing, who are investing obviously a lot of money in Nanaimo, and all the agencies that I work with them. I would thank them for that.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Lindsay. You mentioned that you get a lot of incomplete applications. Obviously, then that would filter down to those that have done them properly. Does that account for a lot of the time delays?
And again, I think that there's a number of factors into the time delays, but absolutely having complete applications is key to our ability to provide timely responses. And it is a drain on our resources right now. So we're openly communicating that to our applicants. I think applicants and the consultants that work for them are under many of the same challenges that we're under, and that they're under pressure to deliver for their clients in a quick manner. But sometimes we're finding that means that the applications we're getting are not complete or are not in the manner that allows us to expedite their approval, yes.
Thank you.
No further questions? Mr. Lindsay, thank you very much. We're on to the next item on the agenda, delegations. We have none. No consent items, Ms. Gurry. And the next are reports, and the first is development permit application number DP 1102-1228, Manzanita Place. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. As you mentioned, this is a development permit for 4 residential units on the subject property. I would note thank you. I was going to say there is an air photo on page 46, and if you're looking at your agenda, there's also a site plan on page 43 that may give you a better sense of how the applicant's proposing to develop the site. So as you can see here, the site is actually bisected by dedicated road, but it is actually one legal parcel. The applicants are asking for variances to setbacks and height. This is largely due to the fact that what we have here is a challenging site in terms of the topography. There's actually quite a steep transition across the lands. And there's also a city right-of-way which limits the ability to develop all of the property. So from staff's perspective, the variances are supportable and would allow for development which is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, you just...
Well, thank you, through you to staff. I didn't notice, is there any issues with shadowing because of the raised extra 6 feet? Would that have any impact on the neighbors?
Your Worship, we do not believe there's any impact. The way that our bylaw is structured, that it's, if you build a pitched roof home, you're actually allowed to go higher, and if you build flat, it has a lower height limit. In this case, they're proposing to develop flat-roofed homes, but not at the height that would be allowed for. So I think it's actually a good compromise here.
Great, thank you.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor of the recommended motion? Opposed? None? Carried. Covenant amendment application number CA 10-1371 Stewart Avenue. Again, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you know, this is an application to amend a covenant which is registered on the subject property. In this case, the covenant was registered in 1987 as part of a rezoning and development of neighboring lands. And specifically, the covenant was to limit the use of the subject property to parking, and it was for parking for a restaurant that previously existed on the other side of Stewart Avenue that's no longer there. So the idea being at the time that there was very limited parking available on the site where the restaurant was, and that this site would provide parking for that use. As I mentioned, the restaurant's now gone. The applicants want to discharge the covenant and allow for the lands to be developed under the underlying zoning, which is single family. So staff support this application. Because it was a covenant that was registered as part of rezoning and because it impacts land use, council's policy is that covenant amendment goes back through a public hearing process. So this application, as you notice by the recommendation, would go back through a public hearing process and have the opportunity for anyone who believes they're impacted by this decision to be heard by council before council made their final determination.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Bonner. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any contrary? Motion carried. C, the Front Street Extension Budget Transfer. Mr. Lindsay again.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to immediately turn this over to Mr. Corson just to give you a brief introduction. I know it says Phil Stewart in your agenda, but Mr. Corson will quickly walk you through this report.
Mr. Corson.
Great, thank you, Your Worship. So I just want to give you a little update on the project. Council's familiar with the plans that were still in the South Downtown Waterfront Initiative and the One Port Drive Master Plan. And one of the key components of this is to create a new connection from Front Street through to the NPA lands. And last year we completed the design work for this, and the project is now ready for tender. And the project includes a new road to an interim standard, that's 2 lanes, drainage, and a waterfront walkway component. The walkway component of the project was to be funded by a grant, and in our conversations with the grant provider, that funding is uncertain at the moment, and we need to resubmit our application. So in order to proceed with the project, with the inclusion of the walkway, we're asking that funds from the excess funds that we have from the C-SPAN right-of-way acquisition be allocated to the walkway. We'll still complete the grant application, and if we are successful in receiving the money, it will go back into the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve Fund. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody's had a chance to read the material. Councillor Bonner, move the recommended motion. Thank you. Seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. The next is the Union of BC Municipalities Funding Program for Flood Risk Assessment, Mapping and Mitigation Planning. Mr. Sims, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. As the report indicates, the Community Emergency Preparedness Program is intended to support the municipality's knowledge of flood hazards. The application for the grant is due on February 22nd. Council resolution is required to move forward with that application. And the intent would be 100% funding up to a maximum of $150,000. So the city has this planned in 2022, I believe, and we would be accelerating that to this year or to 2020.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Turley. Any discussion? All those in favor? Contrary? Motion carried. And then we have bylaws, Housing Agreement Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7262.01. Councillor Armstrong?
Oh, sorry. In the Housing Agreement Amendment Bylaw. Number 2019, number 7262.01, to amend the bylaw to ensure that all existing and future housing units on the site are used for affordable housing, and to update an outdated reference on the Local Government Act be adopted.
Seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
That highway closure and dedication removal bylaw 2019, number 7274, to provide for highway closure and dedication removal of a portion of Labio Road adjacent to 2560 Bowen Road, past third reading.
Seconded Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried. Councillor Armstrong.
That housing agreement bylaw 2019, number 7280, to authorize the housing agreement between the City of Nanaimo and 0948423 BC Limited pertaining to 548 Steves Road be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you.
Your worship, I just
Councillor
want
Bonner's opposed. Pardon me. And here I thought we had unanimity. Correspondence, we have none. Under notices of motion, I see nothing. Other business, Councillor Martman, motion recarbon initiative.
Thank you, Your Worship. Am I on?
No.
Yeah, okay.
You're not.
You were.
No, oh, okay. Thank you.
No, the second one. There
There
you
we
go.
go.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. At this time, I would actually like to defer this motion. I was very enthusiastic after I heard Mr. Sims' presentation about climate change and our windstorm and how it impacted our city. But at this time, I've decided I would like to defer this as we have more strategic planning sessions coming up. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Turley. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Bonner, motion re cannabis and farm use activities.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council has already seen all the motions as we outlined. I would like to know if we want to do them one at a time or all five at once.
Ms. Gurry, I think we're going to have to do them one at a time.
Your worship, if you can do them all at once, as you're going to be forwarding them all to AVICC, so you could make a motion to forward them all if council chooses.
Let me just sort of test the House. Is there any likelihood of strong opposition to these motions being passed on? I don't see any, so Councillor Bonner, why don't you move that all of them?
I'd move that all five motions be put forward.
Seconded, Councillor Martman. Quick off the mark. Any discussion on these motions? These are recommendations going to AVICC. All those in favor?
I had a discussion, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
This is through you, Your Worship, to staff. Is there any cost associated with these motions being prepared for the AVICC?
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, there would be no cost associated. Anything that was done outside of a council motion is not the responsibility of the council or the city, so.
Thank you.
Very good. Anyone? Councillor Thorpe.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm sorry I can't support the motion to advance these. I appreciate the intent, but this is a subject matter which does not apply in any great extent to the city of Nanaimo. We have very, very minimal agricultural land commission or reserve areas within the city limits. And this is not a topic which council has ever discussed or debated amongst ourselves. So to put it forward as something that our council is supporting, I don't think is the case without having had that discussion. So for that reason, I just can't support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I concur with Councillor Thorpe. I don't have enough information to support it as well, and I believe this actually is a motions that should be at the RDN. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in...
Did I not?
Councillor Martman, you are now.
Thank you. I'll speak very briefly, but I will support the motion. And the reason being, after reading through them, a lot of it was to explore what other municipalities are doing. And I believe that this is not really our decision. We have a councillor who wished to put forward some motions to, I don't know if I'll get the acronym right, but AVIIC, and that's where it can be debated. So I will support the motion going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillors Armstrong, Turley, and Thorpe. Motion carries. Thank you. Question period, Ms. Gurry. If we have the sheet. Thanks very much. Heather Ambo, market average rents.
Hi,
Good evening.
how are you? So my question is, where exactly did the values come for the market rents? Because I've been in the rental industry for 6 years in Nanaimo, and the numbers that were put up on the screen are absolutely not reflective of the cost of rentals in the city of Nanaimo. They're much higher, and with the strategic homelessness meetings you have coming up around homelessness, I just want to make sure that the values that are being presented are actually accurate of the market out there. Because the company that I work for, which was approved for 65 Pride Street, he always goes a little bit below market, and our 2 bedrooms run between $1,150 and $1,200, and that's below market. And the values you had up there were $1,000 and something, and those are those would be from about 3 years ago. So there's a homeless issue partly because of the numbers, the rent values being extremely high for Nanaimo.
So the question is the source of the statistics.
Where did the values come from?
Your worship, those are not our numbers. Those come to us, in this case, through CMHC.
Sorry?
CMHC, Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation.
Thank you.
So then my question is, when you go through the homeless strategy meetings that you were talking about, the workshops, are those the values that are going to be presented for the city of Nanaimo, or will it be more reflective of what's actually out there and people are renting? Because there's a huge difference of $200 each unit.
Your worship, I can only present the numbers that are given to us. We don't track them, so I mean, I'll take the comment that, you know, the rents are increasing. I think that's reflective of what we're seeing out there, but the numbers are what they are. Those are the averages that have been provided to us. They are not the only stat that we're going to provide. In fact, there was quite a lengthy discussion paper that was done around the time of the affordable housing strategy, which includes this and a number of other stats related to the issue of housing affordability in the community, and we'll be presenting all of that information.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Les Barclay, item 10C, the Front Street Extension budget transfer.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship and Council. I was rather astonished at the lack of discussion subsequent to Mr. Corson's report to Council. I too read his report. I think it's 2 pages in the agenda for tonight, and I had some questions. So my questions to you, and these are questions to Mayor and Council, not to Mr. Corson. So did Council discuss this report prior to tonight's open meeting? My first question. I'm trying to understand why there is no discussion of this. Can I ask that?
I think it fair to say that council reads all the material it receives and considers it, but I don't recall a specific discussion on this item.
No, okay,
And it
thank you.
wouldn't be appropriate for us to discuss it other than at a council meeting.
No. My next question then, because we're talking about serious expenditure here, $3 million, $1 million, $1 million expenditure, that's a 1% tax, property tax increase. So reading the report, I'm wondering, why was the deadline missed, the March, or why will we not be able to get the grant and have to resubmit?
Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, I can attempt to answer that question. So as outlined in the report, the grant was actually tied to 3 different projects. So although we were ready to proceed on this project, the other 2 projects we had not made sufficient headway on enough to actually proceed. So the condition was that we proceed on all 3. Because we're not proceeding on all three at this time, our recommendation is to reapply with just the one application, or with the one project, with the hopes that we're able to get the grant to cover off these costs.
Okay, I kind of guessed that it was all tied together. So am I right in thinking the worst-case scenario would be that the city does not receive any grant money at all for the total $3 million? That's the worst-case scenario, is it?
That appears
Yes.
to be the consensus.
And then my follow-up to that, what is the likelihood of receiving this grant following the resubmission of the application? I guess this is for Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, I'm not going to put odds on that. I mean, we're hopeful. We were successful when it was part of a larger grant application, but they have their own criteria to evaluate these.
I think it's somewhat less predictable than many elections, Mr. Barclay.
Sure, yeah. No, it's just, it's a significant amount of money, and I was kind of, like I said, astonished at the lack of discussion subsequent.
We are hopeful that it will succeed and we will get our money, but if it doesn't, then we can't proceed. Mr. Sims.
Right. Your Worship, I'd just point out that the funding is, as Mr. Corson mentioned, from surplus funds that we did not expect. And any of the funds that we would receive from the grant will roll back into the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve and will not have an impact on tax rates.
Good.
Okay, I'll keep my fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe a motion for adjournment would be appropriate. Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone. I want to note tonight we concluded without me ignoring Councillor Thorpe for a change.
You were going to say it's ahead of 8 o'clock.